In this video, we're going to be talking about the problem of evil and perhaps trying to look at it in a new sort of way, which I say that very humbly because this is something very smart people have thought about for centuries and centuries, so it's sort of hard to say you have a new way of thinking about it. But this is being inspired from comments that were made by John Lennox in a recent conversation he had with Alex O'Connor, and so I'll play that clip now.
As a mathematician, you get problems that people have attacked for centuries and have got nowhere. And the way mathematicians react to that is that they say perhaps we're asking the wrong question. And I think I found that helpful in the following way, and I'll be brief. It's this, that what faces everybody is a mixed picture. I call it beauty and bombs. In other words, we look at the world, we see some beautiful things and we see some horrible things, especially these days. And any worldview has got to take that into account. That is a fact. And we can argue as long as we like about the theoretical side, if God is good and all-powerful, why this and why that, why the other? And we never come to a satisfactory answer. So I propose another question, equally difficult, but I think it gets us a bit further. Granted that it's like that, is there any evidence anywhere that there is a God who understands it, and to such an extent that I can feel, not that I've got an answer, but that I can see there's a possibility of coming to some peace about it? And my answer to that is that yes, I think there is.
So in this clip, Dr. Lennox draws a comparison between mathematicians and the problem of evil. He's saying, if mathematicians struggle with a question for centuries and centuries, sometimes they might say, well, maybe we're asking the wrong question. And he, raises the idea that perhaps that's the same thing that's going on here with the problem of evil. Maybe we're asking the wrong question. And I think Dr. Lennox is on to something here for two reasons, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Number one being, I think we are approaching the problem of evil with the wrong question or with the wrong presupposition. And number two, I think the Christian worldview is in the best position to give an answer to this sort of problem of evil. Starting then with the first point of coming at it through the wrong lens or from the wrong point of view, I think a strictly philosophical approach to the problem of evil isn't sufficient. It doesn't even have a chance to answer the question, because those who raise the problem of evil rarely raise it in a strictly philosophical way. I've heard many atheists, list off a number of atrocities or accidents or horrific things that have happened to people, and it's certainly meant as an emotional tug as to why would God allow this sort of suffering to go on. And that's part of the reason the argument is so compelling, is because we can relate to that. We know what that suffering is like, and so we can sit there and say, yeah, why would God let someone emotionally suffer in this way? And so oftentimes it's emotional pain, not a set of philosophical premises, that make it difficult for someone who's going through suffering and tragedy to maintain their faith and belief in God. And so it's fair to say that when speaking with someone who's going through a tragedy or through difficulty, we wouldn't sit there and explain it away and why it all happened. Oftentimes the best way to comfort someone who's going through a tragedy is just to sit there and to not say anything, and to sit there with them in it and to feel it with them. And so why would we expect the problem of evil, this great struggle, this great emotional question, to boil down to strictly philosophical points? That doesn't make any sense. Even if there was a magical, airtight, perfect philosophical answer to the question of evil, I don't think it would do much to suffice or to satisfy those who are really struggling and wrestling with this emotionally. And so why do we keep looking for this aha answer to this question? Here's where I think Lennox is exactly right. People who are enduring suffering and really wrestling with, why is God allowing this to happen to me? They're not looking for God to come down and give a treatise about, explaining all these things and why this is going on. Instead, I think deep down, whether they admit it or not, they're looking for three things trust, love, and hope. First, with trust, their suffering often invokes questions of, can I trust that God is still good in the midst of my suffering? Can I trust that God's even there? If he was there, he certainly wouldn't let me go through this. And so they're losing a trust in God, and that's the first part of it. Second, they're looking for love with someone who just grasps what they're going through, grasps the depth of the difficulty and the suffering in the situation. And so a philosophical treatise, like I said before, isn't going to answer this sort of deep emotional question. We just want someone who understands, who gets it, who's willing to sit there in the suffering, in the midst of it with us and go through it with us, even if they're not saying anything. We just long for that sort of love and someone to walk alongside us in that. And third, hope is desired. Hope that this suffering might come to an end. Hope that it's going to be made right. Hope that there's a point to it all. And so I think these are the three things, trust, love, and hope, that people who are enduring suffering are really looking for, the answers that they're really looking for. Therefore, it seems to me that the correct way to approach the problem of evil, and this is sort of what Lennox is getting at, is not like a set of philosophical principles, which, even if they were perfect and great principles, would do little to help and provide comfort for someone who is going through suffering, but instead to begin to ask the question, is there evidence out there for a God who can answer these deep, longing questions of our heart, of trust, love, and hope when we're going through suffering and difficulty like that? Is there any solace to be made in those moments? And here's where we begin to talk about our second point, where I think the Christian worldview absolutely provides the best answer and solution to these deep longings of our heart in the midst of suffering. For this point, I'll be relying a lot on the work of Tim Keller in explaining why Christianity is the best solution to these sort of deep questions we have in the midst of suffering. And he draws an illustration from Proverbs 30 with Agur, who says in verses 3 and 4, "Nor have I learned wisdom, nor do I have the knowledge of the Holy One, who has ascended into heaven and descended, who has gathered the winds in his fist, who has wrapped the waters in his garment, who has established all the ends of the earth. What is his name or his son's name?" So what is he saying? He's saying, I'm in a valley, and when you're in a valley, you can't see out of it unless you were to climb the mountains on either side and, look around and then see the whole picture. And so that's the sort of imagery that Agur is describing here. And so he says, well, the only one who can give me that is the one who's up on top of the mountain. And that would, of course, be God with the heavenly perspective. He's the only one who can see this sort of heavenly perspective from the top of the mountain. So Agur says, I'm not going to have my answer to this injustice, this struggle that I'm experiencing, unless one from the mountain comes down and explains the big picture to me. One who has ascended up there also descends and explains it to me. And then he says, well, who is this and who is his son? So centuries later, in John 3, Jesus would say to Nicodemus, "No one has ascended into heaven but he who has descended from heaven, the Son of Man." Nicodemus would have known the Hebrew Scriptures. He would have been familiar with Agur questioning, who's the one who has ascended and descended into heaven? He's the only one who can explain these deep answers to me. And Jesus is saying, I am the one who Agur was looking for. I have come down from the mountain to tell you. But the next thing that Jesus says is equally unexpected when he says that the Son of Man must be lifted up as the serpent in the wilderness. So he's drawing it to the cross. He's saying, I've come down from heaven. I've come down to give you answers, to explain some of these things. But it doesn't come in the form of a philosophical explanation or a set of principles or an airtight argument. Instead, it comes in the form of a cross. He comes to earth and ascends back to heaven by way of the cross. So that's the ultimate answer. The cross is the ultimate answer to evil and suffering. Why do the innocent suffer? Jesus was the ultimate innocent sufferer. He suffered humiliation of death on a cross, rejection of friends and betrayal of friends, violence from the government, hopelessness, even the very wrath of God. And he did it all so that someday evil could be eradicated from the earth without destroying you and me. So how does the cross help us answer these sort of deep, longing questions of our heart when we're suffering? First, I think it helps us trust God because he hasn't neglected us to suffer alone. He knows what it's like. He hasn't forsaken us in our suffering. It's as if a great tidal wave of evil and pain and injustice has crashed over the head of God himself, which demonstrates an ultimate plan that he has to redeem suffering. He hasn't forgotten about it. He isn't ignorant of it. He's participated in it. Second, it brings love to the person who is suffering because, like I said, he hasn't forsaken them in their suffering. They aren't alone. He sympathizes with us in our suffering. He understands what it's like, and he doesn't just understand it because he's all knowing. He understands it because he experienced it. He is that friend who just comes alongside you and sits there silently without saying anything, and is just a comfort by their presence because they're sitting there and enduring the suffering with you and just getting it and soaking it in with you. Jesus is that brings the love that someone who is suffering is deeply longing for. And third, the cross brings hope, because if Jesus rose from the dead, anything you're going through, any difficulty, it's all going to be okay. Because Christianity doesn't just promise resurrected bodies, but a resurrected world. That is to say, the world to come is not a mere consolation of the things that are lost in this one, but it's a making right of everything that happened in this world, a rendering correct of everything that happened in this world, and the ultimate glorification of all the wrongs made right that we currently now experience. So there you have it. I think Dr. Lennox is right. Approaching the problem of evil and suffering from strictly a philosophical perspective isn't sufficient, because we are creatures of emotion and feelings, and we ask these deep, longing questions when we go through suffering that have nothing to do with philosophy at all. And I think Christianity is the worldview best equipped to provide answers in the form of trust and love and hope in the deepest ways that people are looking for when they're going through suffering. So if you're going through suffering, if you're experiencing hardship, there's great evidence for a God who knows what that suffering's like, who has endured suffering for you on your behalf, and who is calling you to be his child and to the ultimate redemption of your suffering. So I hope this video was hopeful and helpful. If you would enjoy more videos like this and would like to see more like them in the future, I encourage you to consider subscribing to our channel to support us.